Also, like I kept wanting to be like, don't just talk shit. Let's talk about the merits of dungeons. And then immediately I'd open my mouth, I'd get one sentence in, there's a place for dungeons. And then my next sentence, but they suck. Welcome to Take the Damage podcast by Unfortunate Ones. I'm Sav.
I'm Nix.
And I'm Graythorn.
And our topic for today, topic 7 on the die.
7. This is going to be great for you guys because you guys really love this one. Dungeons.
Oh, God.
Can we roll out advantage?
Well, thank you for
please?
listening to Take the
Roll at advantage.
Disadvantage. Anything that pulls us away from
Actually,
the 7.
roll again. I just want to see. We're sticking with dungeons, but I do want to see what the advantage or disadvantage roll would be.
Advantage or disadvantage?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. If it's
Is it advantage, disadvantage, because that could still be a 7?
Yeah, it takes a higher.
Or is it a reroll? Like when you roll under. Oh, wait. Fuck, what's that? Is it a rogue thing? There's a feat in 5e where it's like if you roll under a 7, you can consider it an 8.
Yeah, you can.
So what's 8?
Genre.
Okay, that'd have been better. All right, you love dungeons. You fucking start. You fucking dungeon nerd.
It isn't necessarily that I love dungeons. It's just that I like them as a tool conceptually, and I do like I have run them for the first game I ever ran as a GM was dungeon focused. It was a dungeon was what the characters essentially ran through. And I do like building dungeons. I like the idea of having like a labyrinthian sort of thing that you have to go down and kind of course through and figure out the different components of as you're like navigating. Kind of like when we played the Dungeon Crawl Classic game.
Yeah.
That was very much dungeon-like, where there were things that you had to do in particular times, and like there were puzzles in particular rooms, and you had to solve certain things. And I like them as a tool, and I like them as like exploring particular kinds of concepts as a DM. They're not a great tool necessarily for storytelling. They can be. You can use them.
You can incorporate storytelling into them.
Like DCC had its first it's like a meat grinder one was trying to tell a story, or the subtext of the story that was going on that characters could find out if they explored, the actual like things that were being shown and said, were like it was some sort of like alien it was an alien ruler's like laboratory or cave that he had. No, it was the cave of a king that had been gifted powers and abilities from like this alien species, and like that was the reason why there was like magic and high level stuff. And like if you got all the way to the end of the dungeon, you'd be able to find like the object that he was communicating with this alien species. And if you look into this object, the aliens would figure out that the person they had gifted this stuff to was dead, and it was no longer around, that there's somebody else there, and it would cause an event in which the aliens would come to your planet, or come to the planet that this thing is on. So it was supposed to trigger like a story that your characters would go on. And then the other one was like a time traveler's lab.
Yeah.
And then you figure out that like...
Well, they usually all have stories. Oftentimes dungeons are like self-contained stories.
Usually.
Right. There's a dungeon over here, and then you go check it out, and it has a story within it, and then it generally doesn't pertain to your campaign's story. And even then, it can. Like the end of the dungeon, you get the artifact that drives the story forward, or whatever.
Yeah.
It can. I just functionally am not big on crawling through a dungeon. Like, I think a lot of my love for the game takes place in towns.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could, because you're such a big fan of like the NPC interaction,
yeah, drama
the
and
just people
role playing.
yeah,
And,
people talking to each other and like
yes,
the conversational aspect of TTRPGs. And dungeons are so much more of the like not visual storytelling, but like
environmental storytelling.
environmental storytelling.
Yeah.
It's so much more of that because usually there aren't characters that you're interacting with. Granted, you could easily build a dungeon that has like a fucking like Superman's his cape Fortress of Solitude or whatever, where there's like a voice in the Fortress of Solitude that like he talks to. Like, you could easily have that. You can have like a guardian of the dungeon or whatever, and that like there is a conversation to be had with them. And you can probably even like have it where like that person is very conversational. Where they want to talk to somebody, and you can get like a really interesting narrative, and you can get it even to a point where your characters care about this person
Sure.
as they're going through this dungeon, and the end result of the dungeon could be that you help this character deal with something,
Yeah.
and the character then fades
Oh,
away.
there's so many ways that you could incorporate it into being important. Just like all of your use of the words "can." It's like trying to play a horror game in D&D instead of just playing a horror system. It's like,
Yeah.
you can make it a role play thing. You can make it imperative to the
Yeah.
campaign. You could do all of those things. I just don't enjoy the function and the mechanics of a dungeon very much, so there's no reason for me to force it into being those things
Yeah.
when I can just as easily write those things in places that make more sense. There's nothing wrong with dungeons. I will say I have played very few of them.
Yeah.
And part of that's my own fault because, I just avoid them as a player. I'm just like, oh, there's this dungeon over, especially when they aren't important, when they're not integral. It's like, oh, there's this dungeon over here. And it's like, cool.
Hey, the sewers.
We'll leave that over there.
There's a thing in the sewers.
Cool. Let it stay there.
I think in that Lord's Fall game, I think I only really gave you.
I don't think we did actually any dungeons.
There
No,
was
there's
one.
one
Or
with
dungeon
the-
legs.
Where we got the walkie-talkie thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one dungeon that was the Mind Flayers.
Mind Flayers.
Yeah, it was like a vestige of a Mind Flayers like layer.
Yeah.
Where there were like, I think it was the whatever the thing is that's below a Mind Flayer. There's like a version of it that is like weaker. I don't know what it's called. I forgot what it's called. But it's in that same branch family. So like there was like those things that you could fight or that were in those areas. But yeah, that was like the only sort of real dungeon. But even then, I didn't put like the classic stuff that is in dungeons where you have to like solve puzzles.
There wasn't puzzles in it.
Yeah,
I'm not also a very big puzzles guy.
See, and
I am. I like political puzzles and like I like mysteries,
yeah,
which would be a better description of like when you go into a town and you're trying to figure something out, and it's like kind of a puzzle, but it's like a role play puzzle rather than a physical puzzle. But again, I also just haven't experienced very many of those as a player because like the majority of games that we've played, we've kind of just avoided doing
yeah. I think
dungeons.
In my memory, it's the closest things to actual dungeons I think you have played that at least I have played with you
Dungeon Crawl Classic.
are Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Yeah.
The 2 games with those.
Literally designed for it.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
system is designed for it.
Well, I mean the system is how you play the characters. It's just that those adventure modules.
Yeah, but I think Dungeon Crawl Classics is intentionally written for the sake of doing dungeon crawls. Like original D&D was very dungeon crawly, wasn't it?
Mhm.
It was like that's pretty much what you did.
Well,
It-
Dungeons
and Dragons. That was like the purpose of it, and that's how it was written. Whereas like 5e is not really a dungeon puzzle game.
I mean, there are aspects that like the DMG and like the,
Absolutely,
and stuff where they
it's definitely
explain,
a part of it,
yeah
but it's not like it's not exclusive to it anymore.
yeah, it has shifted away from like, granted, like AD&D has like, it's definitely moved away from all the stuff where like it explains like this is your pool for a portcullis, or this, like, there are specific like rule sets in there.
Yeah,
that,
like the lifting gates and stuff. And
Yeah,
bending
yeah,
bars.
and, like, there's so much stuff
Bending
that feels
bars.
like it's yeah.
Fuck off.
There's so many rules that feel like, oh, you're interacting with a dungeon. You're
Yeah.
interacting with something.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, it is definitely way more built into the system.
Yeah. What is some of, like, because I don't have very much experience to draw upon, what are some of the, like, dungeons that you guys have actually enjoyed?
I like the DCC stuff. I liked running those. I haven't run through many like dungeons in D&D, but I've built a ton of them.
What about as a player?
Like, even as a player, I haven't
Not a lot.
played through many like in TTRPGs.
Sure.
Again, most of my experience has been running them. Like, I ran them again as like my first big game, and then the couple for you guys is DCC. There was also the funny one I did, or the faux dungeon one that I did for our friends.
Yeah, we just didn't play it.
We just didn't play
I
it.
do like the idea of it, though.
Yeah. It was just
Kind of funny.
A dungeon that I had completely made and mapped out, or not really completely made, but I mapped out the majority of it. And the idea of it
And
was,
the puzzles and everything.
it had puzzles and everything. The idea of it was the characters would run across these group of people cooking food, kind of like out in the middle of nowhere. And the food was supposed to entice the players to come and eat it, or to come and try to join.
I have a trick for that, by the way. We'll go into it in a minute.
Yeah. Try to come and join the feast. And in the conversation as they're eating, the people would say, "Oh, we're exploring this cave over here, this little like thing we found, and we're just recovering. Like, we got hurt, we got beat up a little bit. We're just trying to deal with this last thing. Like, you guys look tough. Do you guys want to help us out?" It was going to be a situation where the party could go and deal with a damaged golem, which is in the last room of this dungeon. But the characters would then be walked through this dungeon that had already been solved. So one of the characters...
It's a good introduction for, like, if you're going to have dungeons in your game, it's a good introduction for new players to be like, this is what a solved dungeon looks
Yes.
like, and you can see how the puzzles were solved, how they had to
because
think about things.
The characters were going to explain it. Where, like, they go into this room. It's like, man, this room was a bitch. We had to go across it was all filled with
we
water.
lost a guy through this trap. And
Yeah, we had to go crawl over here. There was like this moon symbol on the table, and we had to grab this thing that looked like a sun. We had to slot it in. Then the water came down. It was crazy.
I actually really like that idea.
Yeah, so it was
I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, it was that idea of just like taking them through solved puzzles, solved rooms, solved traps, like ropes hanging, pittons, whatever. And then the last little, it was like a golem that they were all, the other party had already fought but backed away from because they couldn't beat it. They needed to do like a short rest. And then your team, or the team that are arriving, would be, they'd open up the door again, go in there, defeat this golem, and then the party that was there would share some of the loot. Like, not all of it. They wouldn't share the whole loot because they did the majority of the work.
I'm gonna steal that pretty immediately. I'm gonna do it a little bit differently. I'm not gonna have NPCs take them or whatever. I'm gonna say like a party was sent to go solve this thing, and then they're gonna get there, and it's just gonna be like the open cave entrance, and then they're gonna walk through, and they're gonna be paranoid as fuck because I'm gonna be like, this is a dungeon, and then they're gonna be paranoid and like blah blah blah. But like, as they crawl their way through it, I'm not gonna explicitly say anything. It's gonna be based on their roles and whatnot, of them realizing that this is a solved dungeon. And then it's just the big bad fight at the end. Like, they get to the last cavern or whatever, and there's just a strew of bodies. And a moment, this is the only part where their roles actually matter, a moment of, like, investigating these bodies to figure out what the creature is. And then as soon as it hits, as soon as it lands, have that Lord of the Rings, like, drums in the dark. You hear the creature down some halls or whatever, a corridor, and it's like, here it comes.
That's cool. It's a good take. As you were saying it, I was thinking like, oh yeah, like have the things where like kind of like how you said like, oh, we lost this guy in this part, like maybe having a couple of adventurers that had passed in some of the rooms,
Yeah,
or
just
like
dead.
the remnants of like blood streaking or like like something like that.
I also like very rarely in mine, very rarely just sprinkle in like an unsprung trap. So
Oh, sure.
so like once they start thinking like, oh, this is a solved dungeon, and they start marching through, and then they spring something. You're like, no, you have to be careful and tense the whole time, and just to be disappointed that the whole thing's been solved already. Just the big bad fight at the end.
In my opinion, I thought that was, as far as like the majority of the players that I consistently play with, not being big, because you were a part of that game too. Sav
Yeah.
was, knowing that he has a big dislike for dungeons,
I would have found that so hilarious.
and it was like the two players that we brought were very new, so like this was their first game, so I wanted to, again, to have that taste,
So
to have that idea of what a dungeon could be.
especially with new players, what I was going to tell you is like a way to make that happen, because there's a lot of ways as a DM that you can like make things happen. I know you already know this, but just for fun to talk about it on the podcast.
Sure.
You can get away with very subtle versions of taking away player agency, but it has to be super subtle. And you're not taking away the agency of choice by being like, whatever, they're talking to an NPC and you want the NPC to matter. You don't want your players to just be like, why do I care that they're sad? So you could go to one of your players and be like, there's something about this groveling peasant, even though you've run across groveling peasants before,
Mm-hmm.
where you can't help but pity them. And just that. You're telling your players that in their mind they are thinking pity.
Yeah.
And then they still have the freedom of choice to do whatever they want. They could be disgusted by the pity and kick the peasant and move on with their day if they want to. You're not taking it away. But it is just a little bit more draw in the direction of where, as a DM, you would like things to go. So, like, in that situation, you could have, like, emphasized our hunger, where it's like, it's been a long time since you guys have eaten. Oh, actually, I did that. I did that in one of my campaigns recently, where it's like, it's been a long time since you guys have eaten.
Yeah.
And you can smell the cooking food, and eunuchs in particular, being a human, being a more mundane species within the world, feel that feeling that you as a player know of, like, the growling of your stomach. And not only could you eat, but you know you need to eat. And you also know the rations you have on you just won't satiate you in the moment, or just won't satiate you. It'll fill you up, and you could eat them, but it wouldn't be satisfying. And just slowly just pulling strings to draw them towards that thing, you know?
And it was also like that reminded me of that game that I was talking about, where I was going to run this, and I did that thing where I didn't quite successfully do that pitch.
Sure.
to
I also played
entice them.
against you a little bit because we were both of us trying to, from both sides of the table, explain D&D to a new group.
Yeah, but you helped me. You were trying to help out because you when I brought that out there, one, it was, I think one of the players was a little bit like you in in Lord's Fall, the first campaign that I ran, like the second session, where you were so suspicious of everything.
Yeah.
Where everything felt like it was going to be a trap, and everything was like, so when I put this thing, oh, you smell this great smelling food, she immediately was like, oh, I don't want to, no, that's a trap.
I don't like that it smells good.
Like, I don't like that food smells good. I don't like that it feels like the DM is trying to lure me into this thing. Like, this is going to be a trap.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, okay, it's hard to fight that feeling. But you, as this is another one of those things, is like, I'm not necessarily saying this is a responsibility of veteran players, but like, as a
but
veteran,
it's helpful.
It's helpful as like a veteran player who's like even trying to help co-DM in that moment, because like you said, they're new players.
Yeah.
And try to help show them the ropes. You were like, oh yeah, like I think you said something like, yeah, I'm pretty hungry. Like, you were trying to like help entice them to like to go do the thing.
Yeah.
To go and like, because you knew I wasn't gonna try to hurt you guys. I wasn't gonna. I just wanted to
Well, I knew that you were going easy on us because you had new players, so
Yeah.
probably even if it's dangerous, it would be something interesting.
Yeah, you knew that I was just trying to story hook you into a thing.
I knew you
like,
weren't trying to TPK us.
yeah. I was trying to like get you guys to go and do a thing, to explore an aspect of D&D. And in my mind, an aspect of D&D is something that would prompt you to a dungeon, prompt you to a thing, which is like,
Yeah.
oh, your characters are out on the road.
Yeah.
And there's something you see in the distance. You see a small fire, you smell food cooking, you see a cave in the distance. Or, maybe if one of your characters is a more magically inclined person, you feel a tug in a direction, or maybe they're spectrally, or that some sort of ghost.
Oh,
thing.
it's been one of my favorite uses of a cleric's deity is when there's something that is like just inherently important.
Yeah.
I have them have a feeling that they understand being from their deity.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, you get a strangely warm sensation from within you. You are getting feelings from your deity that there's something about this path
Yeah.
that you might want to take.
Yeah.
Or they were looking upon an ominous forest, and I was like, there's something that your deity does not like. You get a sensation from your soul of a warning about that place.
Mm-hmm. And like for me, I think that's if you were inclined as a DM to like put something neat or something cool for your players in a dungeon, and you were trying to find a way to do it, you'd obfuscate travel. Like if they're traveling someplace, you do something like that. You do some sort of calling to an area to get them to go into that area.
Yeah.
and to
Sensations and callings and things like that are nice ways to like implement yourself in the head of your characters, especially when you tell them they're thinking of something.
Yes. And it's also like it really would help if like you have the excuse of a cleric in a deity connection.
Yeah.
If you have some sort of thing that is like a mystical connection to help kind of push in that direction, push in
Mhm.
that narrative. I think I mentioned it in the last episode, which is I had an abandoned church or something like that, or some sort of thing that I wanted to run you guys in Lord's Fall. I had built it out like a whole thing. It was going to be like spectrally based enemies. It would be like wraiths and different things like that. Like that was the main constitution of the stuff that you were fighting. And I finally remembered what the thing was. The sentient being is there's I think it's like, I don't know if it's Russian or Ukrainian or some sort of like Croatian story. I don't remember exactly what the origin of it, but it's Kashi the Deathless. It's an old folklore, whatever, and it's a being that has like his soul trapped in like this other vessel, and that's how he's immortal.
Sure.
Is you can't kill him, you can't kill his body because his soul's under his body. It's in this other thing. I was like, oh, so inspiring off Koshi the Deathless, who is this like charismatic kind of like person, this being. I was like, oh, I was gonna have this item that is the thing that contains his soul, and he's looking for a new body.
Oh, you talked about that last podcast.
Yeah. And I just remembered the name of the thing. I was like, I put that into a dungeon. I put that into the church dungeon. It would be like in an off room. That's like not the actual loot, not the actual like end goal of like the reward for the players to go through this dungeon. This was just like an offshoot thing that if they went into this room, they'd be able to find it. And I just thought that would be fun to play with the players. And in my mind, that's also another thing you could do with dungeons. It's just like, as a DM, have fun and have interesting things. One,
it's a nice way to
players.
tell like side quests where they know there's going to be a reward at the end, because usually there's a reward at the end of a dungeon. So like playing off that trope, they know they're going to get something out of it, and it's an excuse for you as a DM to be able to tell a tale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They can be pretty fun. At least in my mind, I think there's a lot of like useful aspects to it. But you know what else is a useful aspect? Apparently.
Oh, there's a lot of use for our sponsors.
Yeah. Our sponsors have a lot of use.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Come on, everybody. Let's get
Come
hyped.
on, everybody.
Let's go and roll
Yeah.
on the loot table. Let's go and see
Let's
who
do
our
it, everybody.
sponsors will be.
Come on. Let's go.
Let's go roll on the loot table.
Who our sponsors will be? Who's it gonna be? Who's it gonna be?
I don't know.
I don't know. You don't know. We don't know.
Nobody knows.
It's up to the dice to roll on the loot table to know.
I got a list right here.
Well, okay, so you have a little bit of an inclination.
I
who
do
would
have
know.
a little bit.
I don't even have the titles of any of our sponsors. All right, today's sponsor. Ooh, critical success. A 10.
A 10. That is Kobold Keg.
Kobold Keg. I already like it. Don't even read it. I like it.
He's
right,
always
well-
spot sponsored now.
Moving on.
They sell themselves.
There's kobolds and kegs. All right, I'm in.
Kobold Keg. Are you like us here at Unfortunate Ones? Two of us, a proud owner of our very own kobold companion. One of us begrudgingly taking care of a kobold he didn't ask for, and can't help but think of ways to make I lost my spot.
You got it. You're good. You're good. You can take it from the top or you can continue. It's up to you.
Ways to make the lovable ball of fur's day a little brighter. Look no further than Kobold Keg. Kobold Keg brings your little canine friend a monthly box of treats and toys that will keep them entertained while you're out clearing giant rats from the local baker's cellar. Each Kobold Keg comes with 2 toys, 2 bags of treats, and a pointy stick that your little kobold friend can use to play fetch or stab at intruders with their strange fantasy creature paws that are somehow able to allow them to wield weapons like people. Already have enough pointy sticks? Well, you can choose from a wide selection of pots, pans, leather bardings, or even a selection of themed premium gear to add to your furry friend's silly little dogman armory. Keep your best friend feeling happy and appreciated with Kobold Keg today.
Absolutely.
Oh,
So-
yeah.
I mean, look, I've had a kobold companion for years,
Yeah.
and they are mischievous, and they get into things, and they ruin stuff. And it wasn't until I found Kobold Keg and started getting these little surprise mystery boxes of goodies that kobolds love that I was able to otherwise tame my kobold companion.
Yeah.
Their mischief all of a sudden cold by the pointy sticks that were sent to me via this service.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been life-changing because I know that when I'm in a dangerous situation facing down a foe where it'd be really useful for my kobold companion to be distracting it or otherwise poking it with a stick, when I look down, they're not going to be off in the woods fucking around. They're
Yeah.
going to be right there already playing with the stick that they got from Kobold Keg.
Yeah.
It's
100%.
changed my life night and day. My life has been significantly improved.
Yeah.
As is, if you care about this type of thing, my kobold's life.
Yeah. I mean, most people don't share that.
True.
This is, this is a product for people who care about their kobolds and like care about how they look too. And even the kobolds, like those pots, they love wearing them. Like they're perfectly fitted. Well, not perfectly fitted. They're good.
Well
pots.
enough fitted. Yeah. Well, I mean, in place of a helmet,
Yeah.
put
They're
a pot on your dog's head.
They're just the right size for most kobolds they see the pot and immediately know that it belongs on their head and they put it right on their head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say, if you don't believe my success story, I also have a good friend named Priestess, a warlock, who had met on a perilous mission Blacktail, who now sits in the corner of our little tavern here. Everybody look over at our little kobold companion Blacktail and appreciate him. Blacktail began joining Priestess on Realm Watching missions, which I don't know if you've ever heard of Realm Watchers, but they are a serious group, constantly in peril. And her plan was obviously to make Blacktail into a full-fledged Realm Watcher.
Yeah.
But it took a little bit of convincing. And in the time and adventures while waiting for that convincing to happen, you have a kobold that is nothing but bare fur. So it wasn't until Priestess got her hands on the service that is Kobold Keg,
Yeah.
where he could have a pot to put on his head and, leathers to put around his tiny little kobold body to protect him in the perilous situations that
Yeah.
Priestess would constantly put him in. It wasn't until that he became truly useful, and it got him a spot. He became a full-on Realm Watcher.
Yeah. I mean, it you made a fair point with the leathers. It's to go to an armorer and ask for specifically, because you can go in there off the shelf, get yourself some leathers, and it'll probably be fine for most people. But kobold size ones, Not all armorers do that.
Yeah,
The-
why would they make child-sized armors? What kind of campaign
Yeah.
is this?
Exactly. But the fine craftsmen at Cobalt Keg, that's what that's the only
That's
thing
what
they're doing.
they do.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
So they only use the finest leathers for your cobalt.
Perfectly fit for their
Perfectly-
tiny little kobold dog
Dude,
bodies.
It's amazing. It's such a good
Yeah.
run.
And as you can see, with Blacktail being in the corner there, he's stuck around. So clearly,
Oh, yeah.
it was useful.
Yeah.
It was helpful.
And in this moment, I remembered again a long time ago when we were talking about the art for Blacktail. Yeah, I was supposed to put a pot in his head. He doesn't have a pot in his head.
He should
There
have
was
a
supposed
pot.
to be a pot in
He
his
should have
head.
a pot on his head. No, he's supposed to have oversized actual armor because he's a full-on realm watcher.
I think you had mentioned that too, and Gray had mentioned
Because
the
he does
pot.
already have the
He has
chainmail.
the chainmail. I
Yeah.
just didn't do any of the other stuff for him.
But before the chainmail, Kobold Keg leathers. Get
Uh,
involved.
Get your Cobalt Keg today.
So, dungeons. I had an idea for a dungeon that I want in Wilderdam, which is inspired by a game that I've always wanted to play but never played, which is like Hurry Up Before We All Explode or something like that. It's a Steam game where one player gets a bomb defusal manual and the other player gets a bomb, and you only have your microphones and trying to like, what does it look like? It looks like this. Oh, that
Yeah.
might be this bomb. If it's this bomb, you cut the red wire. So it's kind of based off that idea where there was like runes on one side that in one room on a wall that like the runes slide around or whatever.
Yeah.
And one player has to be there while the other player has to be at the door. But if you fuck up the runes, it sets off a trap with the person at the door.
Yeah.
And then it resets and they have to reattempt to solve the puzzle. But it's a 2-person puzzle. It has to be. And then the door itself has like runes on it. So the person in this room has to shout to the person in that room to basically tell them how to solve the puzzle. And then the person in the other room has to try and solve the puzzle. That's my dungeon puzzle that I've been wanting to play for a very long time. That will be in Wilderdam. It's where you get the unimportant information of the patron of the warlock, who is the head of the cult that you're fighting.
Yeah.
The patron is a Leviathan.
Okay.
And inside of that cave is like cave drawings and whatnot that
Help
show
describe
you that there's a
yeah.
Leviathan, and it used, before there was a dam, it was a lake and it connected to the ocean, blah, blah, blah. So you kind of get just unnecessary lore.
Yeah, I mean, again, like we've talked about before, the environmental storytelling that you could do, like for stuff that wouldn't necessarily fit for a character to just walk up to the party and be like, "Here's all the lore of know what's going on in this world. I
Yeah.
know all of it," and it's like,
And there's no NPCs here, so it's like entirely environmental storytelling,
Yeah.
like you said.
yeah. So they would look at the cave drawings and be like, "Oh, they can infer all this information."
And there's like hints and clues, so like if you don't solve the puzzle, you could maybe figure it out, but the answer is behind that door.
Yeah.
Type deal. Which I think is a good use for a dungeon, especially when it's not necessary. Also, it makes losing the campaign if you lose during the big bad fight, which I would also love to talk about. I hope nobody that ever plays this game gets these spoilers, but it's a dam, and the bad guy, air quotes bad guy, he genuinely tried to get society out of this place, knowing that he was intending to blow the dam. You find out like halfway through the campaign, before the campaign even started, before you entered this valley, he could have blown the dam.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why he hasn't is because he's trying to get everybody out. He's trying to save everybody. I mean, they didn't need saving. He's still a bad guy. He's still ruining, multiple cities and forcibly punishing people and blah, 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 blah. But anyways, he could just blow the dam. And when you go to do the big bad fight, part of like the environment of the fight is him being like, well, fuck it, set it in motion, and he's going to try and blow the dam. So if you lose the fight, I'm gonna take one of the characters and be like, the moment you all die, right? If it's a TPK, the last one to die, or just a random roll on the die, probably would be a more fun way to do it. Is you black out. What happened? Oh no, we lost. Well, yes, but hold on. Nyx, your dreams turn to thoughts as you realize you are starting to wake. And you feel yourself floating. And you're half leaned on something. As you open your eyes, you are leaned on some piece of debris. And as you look around you, you are floating in the middle of a lake. And you start to recognize the peaks of the lake surrounding it are the peaks of the valley that you have spent this entire campaign in. You've lost.
Mm-hmm.
The dam has been blown, and it is now a lake. All of the cities, all of the towns, all of the people that were still in the valley are gone. And you see a very large shadow move beneath you, beneath the water. You poke your head into the water, and there's just a gigantic leviathan floating around in the lake beneath you. Congratulations, you lost.
What's your general take on dungeons, Gray?
Not a fan. Not a fan of the dungeons part of Dungeons and Dragons.
How do you feel about dragons?
Love them. Love them.
Like, are you not a fan of both aspects of being a player and being a DM? Like, either side of the table when it comes to dungeons, or
A little bit of both, because the way I see it is there's not a lot of flexibility or interactability when it comes to dungeons in my mind. Like Sov, I do like having more NPCs around. I like it when the area is alive,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Sure.
When it comes to dungeons, like as a player, I
I'm
almost
okay with them as
I
a
almost
player.
check out.
Really?
Yeah,
I
like
think I'm okay with them as a player. I don't want to run them.
I know Ace's game that we played together. He had a few dungeons,
Yes.
and
He likes them. He likes dungeons.
He does, and I almost check out of them.
But Ace also he's the aspect of dungeons that I was gonna bring up.
His dungeons are funny. There's
Yes.
there's always something, some sort of weird, funny gimmick to it, and we've made out the memes, the vitality, and all that shit.
Yeah. He's a big fan of like the riddle style dungeons.
I think like I get what you mean of like checking out of them. I think I'm okay with them as a player. Like it's like a lot of aspects for me of D&D where like I have a good time when I'm in them. I'm just not drawn to them.
Mhm.
Like if you give me the options between like, oh, there's some drama thing happening in this town, or this town is being attacked by a creature or whatever, if there's anything going on in the town, and it's like, or you can go over here to this dungeon. 10 times out of 10, I'm going to go to the town. But like, if you shove me in a dungeon, I'm going to have a good time. I don't necessarily want to be in a dungeon.
Mhm.
And as a DM, I'm less
Inclined.
ambivalent. I'm less negative towards dungeons as a DM.
Okay.
As a player, I check out. As a DM, I have an idea of what I like to do with it. So at least I have made it, so I can
You know what's
Have
happening.
I can make it interesting to me as a player,
Yeah.
while as a DM. That's what I try to do.
Have you sat down and like made dungeons before?
I've actually made a decent amount.
Oh, okay.
My very first module that I made has like 4 dungeons in it,
Okay.
but I have a particular way of building dungeons. I try to limit it to 5 rooms essentially. And it's 1 room introduces you to the theme of the dungeon. 1 room introduces you to the stakes of the dungeon. 1 or 2 rooms gives you something interesting about it, whether it be a choice or lore.
Okay.
And then 1 room is the finale. That's what I try to keep everything to, and I don't necessarily make it linear. In my two
So when you say not linear, does that mean like
You could hit different points.
there's many rooms beyond these 5 rooms, and like these are just aspects that you hit along the way?
No, I literally
You
actually
could
just
go
5
to
rooms.
those 5
Oh,
rooms
oh,
at
okay.
different.
So
You
yeah.
don't have to beeline. Like it's not like room 1, room 2, room 3.
Okay.
It's kind of like walking into
stakes room.
Yeah, it's kind of like walking into a house and there's two.
There's a main
1, 2,
room,
3
and then there's
doors.
offshoots that lead to the other.
More or less. I try to do it like that. Which in my 2 campaigns ago, what I call long form 1, I'll just say.
Sure.
There was a dungeon where it was a mine shaft, essentially, an abandoned one. You walk in, you see, it's a mine shaft. You go to your left, there's an old like dining room. You go to your right, there's an old barracks. You go going down the mine shaft, and you find a dead end. And then there's a little hole, and the hole opens up to a laboratory. The laboratory opens up to one big room, and there's 4 doors. There's the overseer's room, there's the barracks, there's the break room, and then there's the laboratory. And that's kind of just like, that's what my dungeons are essentially.
Okay.
So I try to keep them short. I try to keep them simple, but I try to shove as much interest into it that isn't just this hallway has a trap and there's a riddle and there's a monster and you got to get past all of those to get to the thing that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think that is an aspect of a lot of dungeons that I think I could see as being like wearing on certain players where they don't necessarily want to play them, which is just like, yeah, the trope of a dungeon, which is walk down this hallway. The hallway's trapped. The hallway leads to a room. The room has monsters in it. You got to kill the monsters, whatever happens to be the monsters. And then that room with the monsters has a puzzle you need to solve to get into the next hallway. And then kind of rinse, repeat,
I'm sure it's also just like this is my lack of understanding or potentially just like oversimplifying it. But it also just feels like, as far as checking out is concerned, it also feels like it's like I guess unless you're playing on the VTT where everything is super visual, you're relying on theater of the mind. So there's no actual way for you to necessarily see the trap or figure out the trap unless you're the player that's, like check for trap.
Yeah.
Okay, new hallway, check for trap. New hallway, check for trap, which immediately, again, that's checkout moment. And then the other aspect that I don't like of it is the idea that it's like, oh, well, like everything that's being solved is like being solved through rolls.
Yeah.
To a degree, which is like, it's relying too much on my character statistics and not my character's personality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that.
So like, there's just so much more drive for me to, depending on my character, like if I'm trying to navigate politics or whatever, maybe my character's good at it, maybe they're bad at it, maybe they're overly aggressive, or maybe they're genuinely charming and intelligent. And then playing into that while trying to navigate conversations, to me, that's like a really enthralling puzzle. Whereas like roll for trap is not necessarily. And I'm sure that like a better DM doesn't do that, right? Someone more versed in dungeons probably does a better job like painting it and making sure that if the sconce is important, the sconce is described. And like, you do have to use your mind to figure it out. But even in that situation where you have a better dungeon master who is fully painting the picture and creating an actual puzzle that you actually need to think about to solve, not just roll dice, that feels like a challenge for my player, not for my character. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think that is a part of a lot of dungeons. Is at least when I think of like classic dungeons, you are kind of challenging your player. Like you kind of want the player to think about things. You want the player to think about a way to logistically solve something, or a way to solve a riddle, a way to solve like pattern in a room, or like even an environmental feature where like
right.
let's say the room is playing with gravity, or the room is playing with water or something like that. It isn't something that the character is solving necessarily. It's
Yeah.
you can if you get to the point, because I've definitely seen this, and I have done it before, where you as a person don't understand the puzzle, and you go to your DM for mercy, sort of, where you're like,
Yeah. Can I get a roll?
can I roll my intelligence to get clues or to figure out what's going on here? Because I just don't know what's happening.
Right. But okay, so if it is to the player or to the roles, if I am playing a character whose part of their personality is like maybe they have a lot of wisdom and they're great in the woods and they're great at tracking and whatnot, but they're not specifically intelligent. They grew up in the woods. They've never read a book in their life. They're potentially not even literate. They have a -1 to their intelligence, and I play them in that way. This dungeon now has nothing to do with my character.
Yeah.
Like, I can't rely on my character's personality to solve this because I should be playing into them being a lesser intelligent character. And then I also can't rely on my character to roll out of this situation because they have no roles. Okay, well, maybe, D&D is a group game. Maybe have your wizard do it, not the barbarian. And it's like, yeah, but as the barbarian, what's my role here? What am I doing? I'm waiting for the big bad at the end to fight them. That means that all of the progress in the dungeon is less fun to me.
It's
And
fun.
I suppose there could be, sorry, real
Yeah,
quick. I suppose
for
there
it.
could be things placed in there where my strength matters. But again, now you're playing into my roles and not my personality. So for that barbarian character, their personality, other than unless it's like a goofy thing where like it's funny that the barbarian is bumbling their way through it, which that I can see being enjoyable, but in a more serious campaign, there's just nothing here for that character.
Yeah. My thoughts on what you were saying is something I said a little bit earlier, where there could be a potential like companion to the dungeon, where like for some reason, if you were as a DM where you wanted, let's say you had this solo character or even a group of characters that were like that, where it's definitely way more personality driven in
Sure.
order to solve, or in order that's how they go through the game. My immediate thought was like, oh, what if I had like a dungeon that was like the first aspect of it was relatively open, and there were parts of it that were like already explored and open, because there was some form of like a construct, like a sentient constructs that lived in this dungeon, and your characters interact with these people or these creatures, and so you'll have this level of interaction where these things will help you solve dungeon or solve the different parts of the dungeon. And even having moments where like you get to a room and there's a thing, and like the constructs have no idea what it is, and they're helping you, and it's your conversation, and like you get clues based off of what you're doing with these people, and they help you in different aspects.
Sure.
And like you open up the door, and then you can have a moment where like these little constructs get like really happy and like, and they start exploring the room, and they start doing these things, and like, oh, I can like kind of like not quite Ratchet and Clank, but there's some of those like old games, those old kind of toony style games where you have these little creatures that help you do things.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you could probably have a moment like that where you have your party that is exploring this dungeon and exploring it in this way where they're interacting with these like cute little creatures of some way.
Fuck me. I just bouncing off of what you're talking about. It would be a really neat dungeon would be in Ratchet and Clank when you're playing exclusively as Ratchet. You have the little robots, and they do a certain amount of damage. And
Yeah.
some of them are bridges and things like that.
Yeah. They change shapes and stuff like that.
That would be
That's
really
part
cool
of what I
because
was
then
thinking,
even your dumber characters could direct them to do things.
Exactly. Yeah. So there are ways I think you can do and you can handle, and like
That sounds a lot better because then you're almost exclusively playing into the personality of the characters because they aren't solving the puzzle. They're using things
to
in through role play, using things to solve the puzzle.
Yeah. And like again, the one I brought up earlier, which is like if there was like a spectral companion, if there was like a ghost, a fully articulate
Yeah.
ghost that was or whatever projection that was, let's say it's a astral projection wizard who is like trying to get back to his body, but part of the dungeon is like locked him out of that area.
Mhm.
So he wants to help you kind of get through this dungeon. And let's say it's he's been away for so long and he's come back and his dungeon has changed. And it's not the same, but he recognizes some of it.
Well, and you're also implementing, like, there could be ideas of, like, some level of sacrifice where, like, you could solve this by collapsing this room and you have to convince the spectral thing because it doesn't want to lose that room. And
Yes, exactly. So you'll have stuff like that. And like part
I think
part
they
of
can
solving
be
that
done
stuff
well.
is I'm saying if you want to do like stuff where you're driving a little bit more towards interaction, like having a little bit more of your persuasion and how you're talking, and like once you open that up, because I never really thought about that part that you said, which is dungeons are so heavily focused on the roll and the sheet, and like because they are. There's so
Or the
much,
player.
or the player, where it's like it's rote. It's I walk in this room, check for traps. Walk to the next room, check for traps. Like it's kind of like opening up doors and like treasure chest. What's the first thing that people do? Oh, I check for traps. It's like the first call that your rogue does is to do these things. And I never really thought of that necessarily as a negative, because it's always like a fast aspect of like, at least in my mind, it feels like a kind of a quick thing that people do before they do certain things. But like, if you're doing it all the time, especially in a location where like every single room, every interaction is something like that, I could see that being annoying.
well, then the other side of that, it's the duality between it relying on your character statistics or your player's acuity,
Yeah.
not the character's acuity.
Yeah.
I think that's the commonplace of dungeons that I don't like. And I'm sure you can do it in other ways. I'm sure there's
Of
people
course.
that will listen to this and be like, well, you guys are
Yeah,
only
you're doing it
describing
wrong.
bad dungeons.
100%. There will be people who are just like, these guys don't know what to talk about. They've never built a good
Well, to
dungeon
be
in their life."
fair, I do have very limited experience
Yeah.
with dungeons, but my limited experience is because they've been less fun and because I've checked out.
And if you look at any module, that's exactly
A
what
lot of
dungeons
modules are.
That's how a lot of them are.
And even like the content I've consumed, where I've seen people who are good DMs and they run dungeons. A lot of these aspects, a lot of stuff we've talked about, it exists in these dungeons.
Oh, and I could see it not being like considered problematic. Like I could see a lot of people really enjoying dungeons and dungeon crawls for the sake of the genuine challenge that it is put onto the players themselves. It's just not usually how I run my games, where I usually run my games that my player characters, personalities and whatnot, and intelligence and all of those things are really important. So like I could see wanting to play through with a character, even multiple characters at that point wouldn't matter, because you're not really embodying the character if your puzzle is meant to be challenging to your players.
Yeah.
And I could see people being really into that. I can see tabletop roleplay games, or just tabletop games in general, being a great place to experience challenging puzzles for your players.
Yeah.
It's just not my drive.
Yeah. I think that's part of like the wargaming aspect of
Almost.
like,
Yeah.
of D&D, which is if you're somebody who is way more into that mechanical side of stuff, and like it's part of that is like you're solving the puzzle of what is the best way to get the most juice out of the set of criteria on your sheet in order to do the most damage or to move the most or whatever. Like that person, they're already playing the game in which they're not necessarily playing through their character. Maybe they're doing both, but it's like a huge part of that person's joy and drive comes from that wargaming aspect of it. So when you toss that player into a dungeon and like, hey, I'm kind of challenging you as the player.
Yeah.
Figure this out. Solve these different things. Solve this. Yeah, like those games exist on Steam where it's just going through whatever and solving the puzzles, solving the doors.
Well, and there's also a rewarding thing doing that in a campaign where, like, yes, it was your players that solved the puzzles, not your characters, but they were embodying a character, and moving forward in it, the solving of a piece of that puzzle or the puzzle itself will be attributed to a character at the end of the day. So, like, it was like, oh yeah, remember when Ace solved that puzzle,
Yeah.
rather than the player. and that'll be a written into the lore of the
yeah,
campaign
of course.
for that character, not the player.
And there's also like the funny and the humoristic stuff that can come from these kinds of things where
Yeah.
the characters are checking for traps. And the character confidently believes that there's no trap there, and
Yeah.
then they walk into a trap.
Yep.
Like
Oh, again, like I said, like when we did Dungeon Crawl Classics, like I do enjoy them when I'm in them. It's just not something that I am drawn to.
sure.
Because, like, our Dungeon Crawl Classics, both of them were pretty goofy
Yes.
and very enjoyable. I had a good time on both of those nights. So, like,
I mean, Gray checked out the whole time.
Yes.
You got some good laughs too.
Mostly checked out.
That's fine. Fair enough.
Remember, he just ran to the end of the hallway and
That's true. Actually, hold on.
yes,
Yes, that is
yes,
true.
as an aspect to highlight him checking out.
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
just,
as an
just getting
aspect
to the end of this thing.
You know,
Emphasis-
these guys are all messing with this pool. This guy over here, he's just gonna go somewhere else while they're doing it.
Yeah.
And,
And
the
damn
end.
all of them.
Yeah. Hey,
You know what? I take it back.
98th percentile.
I am not going to accuse you of enjoying it because you genuinely did just try and run to the end and got us all killed.
Well, realistically, I was just exploring.
I know.
Yeah, of
You
course,
were
of course.
trying.
I didn't think it was gonna be literally, oh, we don't know what to do here. I guess your players are dead.
Not knowing what to do, by the way, sometimes it feels like mercy when it's like we're trying to get diamonds out of the pond and then
Yeah.
you like roll poorly and you don't get the diamonds out of the pond. And while that needs to happen and your players are on the right track and there's no way to make it happen, another bad solution is to have them just keep rolling. And the reason why I say that is because when you allow characters to keep rolling because they're failing at something, oftentimes, not as the player, but as the character, they will check out of doing that because it almost feels unimportant. To just like, oh, you could just keep rolling and then get the diamonds, and like, I don't know, it just like it loses the importance of the moment to get the diamonds, and also, if I could just fail this as a roll, then likely that's not going to lead to a TPK. So that aspect of that game was, I think, a little bit strangely written. The fact that we didn't get the diamonds and therefore failed. I almost think that it should be a little bit more mysterious to get the diamonds, but shouldn't be a roll to get the diamonds, so that if the players find the solution, they can just do the solution. Because otherwise you might scare them away from the solution into a TPK.
I think from my memory of how we played the game and how the game was structured, it was figuring out that the diamonds could get removed.
Yeah.
Um,
It might not even been rolls, to be honest.
I think it was a roll to figure that out.
Yeah.
And I think somebody failed, and I think even in the book it calls for like, even if you fail, you know that this could be, that you could remove
Important,
this, that
yeah.
you could pry it off. And I believe people were doing that. People figured it out, and then it was just people were just shoplifting. People were just taking.
Yeah.
It just so happened to be that the
Simultaneously.
game itself called for it being a certain length of time for the water to exit this pool and to lower. Because I believe
Maybe it was just, it should have been a hint that the water was getting
I-
lower. Or,
I believe that I did call that out. I think there was an amount of time.
Oh, it could
that-
have easily just been us fucking around and some of our characters were running to the end while
Yes,
the other ones
that
were
is what
solving
happened.
it. Yeah.
This was happening where, like, I believe when Gray went to that final door, I think I was telling, because I think it was Ace. No, not.
No, it was just me and Gray on that.
Oh, it was, sorry, it was one of your characters. I think it was Sov's. One of Sov's characters was, I think I called out, noticed that the pool level was falling.
You might. It's been so long. I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it could
But
have just been us
it
fucking
was-
around trying to hit that 98.
Yeah, but it was one of your characters and one of Sov's characters and one of Gray's characters were already at the end. As like some of your characters were in the back, like trying to do these other things.
Good.
Because that's a
We're role playing a 10-man party.
exactly.
We were doing everything at the same time.
Yeah, that was another aspect of it, which is because you guys had so many characters,
Yeah.
you could have characters that are behind trying to solve stuff. And then you have the characters that are just like, yeah, I want to go. Like, this guy's just going ahead.
Exploring.
He's exploring. And so, like, it definitely did open up the opportunity where, like, oh, yeah, the way that this dungeon works is if you open this door, it starts triggering events where, like, oh, you didn't do the part where it weakens this army to make it, you could kill them.
Yeah.
Oh, you're at endgame. It's TPK.
Yeah.
I was like, oh shit.
Look.
Well, we're here now. Yeah.
We can only blame the DM so much when only 2% of people fail. Us hitting that 2% makes us special, whether that's a good thing or bad thing. And it has nothing to do with the DM at that point.
I believe in elementary school they would just say we have curious minds.
I do. One, I think I never really thought about the roll on sheet thing, and two, I think in this conversation, for me at least, I kind of want to play more with that idea of like the companion dungeon. Like I kind of really like that. I never really
Or just
thought about that.
thinking about a way to make character personality the driving
Or
factor.
even just involve it. Like maybe you play with both, where you have a little bit of that like interaction.
Sure,
with your
there's nothing
player
wrong with
and,
rolling.
like the sheet and stuff and all that stuff, but like get a little bit more of that NPC interaction, a little bit more of that like personality involvement. The persuasion, not necessarily rolls, but the conversation.
Yeah.
To allow that to be an aspect of solving aspects of a dungeon. I like that. It's cool.
It'd be interesting.
You got anything else on this, Gray?
No.
I felt like we cut you off when you were talking about stuff, but we do it all the time. I felt like there was maybe more juice to you.
I said dungeons, and I said my dungeon.
Hold on, let's go over the list of what you said so far.
Heuristics.
Dungeons suck.
That's the most important one. Probably
That's
said it more than once.
That's your list. That's about,
that's the list.
That's Saul's list.
No, then I said everything I had to say.
I think they definitely have their place. They just don't necessarily have the place in every game.
Of course, and not
And
every DM is
not every
yeah,
DM.
they do have their place, and I think if you're gonna put them there, make them important to what's going on in some places.
Sure.
I think like the idea of having a dungeon that's just a little place out there, or like some old guy's
Like
tomb.
just a loot dungeon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
self-contained dungeons I don't think would ever be for me.
Yeah.
At least as a DM.
Yeah.
Self-contained dungeons where it's like there's a dungeon that you guys can just spend a session on and not progress your story. Like I don't think that would ever be for me.
Even if it was like a gift dungeon, or like it was something to help the players.
Depends to what degree and how it's helping the players. I think if it's like I said as an example earlier, it grants an artifact.
I'm
Even
saying
if it's
not in
not
that way. Like
even
not-
if it's not necessary to drive the story, it will drive the story, then I
Yeah.
think great. But
If
nah,
it's
just a
just-
level up sequence? Not really.
Okay.
I don't think
Like,
that would
like-
be for me.
yeah, like it's just cool armor and a better sword.
even yeah, I like think about the way I did leveling when we did G&G, which was a way that I've actually adopted in most of my games, which is like the completion of a task
Mm-hmm.
or a mission or a goal or whatever the fuck it was, where you guys decided you wanted to lean into a narrative, and then at the end of that narrative, I leveled you guys up. It like basically, for me, I kind of like pretty much everything to be important. Now, if it was like a thing that not necessarily necessary to progress the story, but would progress the story, then sure.
Sure.
As in, if the reward was significant, then I could see doing it. Like the train heist thing that I put in front of you guys. I don't know how you would use it, but I can absolutely see in the 1800s in a campaign like that, you guys having a Gatling gun. I can absolutely see progressing your guys' aggressive force onto this rival gang. You know what I mean? Like, because
Yeah.
that's just, it's more of a tool that could get you in trouble for using it rather than a tool that is going to become a hindrance in combat, like, yeah, at that point, anytime you guys find any small group of the rival gang, you guys are just winning. So, like, it would progress the story pretty significantly in your guys' ability as the underdogs to aggress
Yeah.
the rival gang. So, if the reward is like that level of not necessarily important, but useful, I could see it.
Okay.
But just it being a neat place to get a sword?
Yeah, like just a
Probably
random
not.
loot dungeon. You're not. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, probably not.
I can see that.
But I mean, this is also just, I mean, my other solution, which I've done multiple times, I did it in Realm Watchers multiple times, is like, it's dungeon-esque in the idea that it's underground and in tunnels, but it's just a town. It's a town underground. It's a town in the sewers. It's a town. It's a town in tunnels. It's just a town with a different
I wouldn't
layout.
qualify it like, oh, it's
It's not a
underground. It's now a dungeon.
It's not mechanically a dungeon
Yeah,
by
yeah.
any means. Like,
No.
what do you mean we can't get through the door? That's because there's guards on the door,
That's
just
'cause
like
it-
there's guards at the gates of a castle.
That's because it's locked. Like any
It's a-
door.
It's
would
an
be locked.
underground castle.
No, this is a dungeon, man. I gotta
It's a
solve
dungeon.
this.
It's a dungeon castle.
You see how this wood grain on this door kind of bends to the left a little, then it goes up, and then there's a little circle. That means there's a moon when you gotta go.
It's a
Dude,
puzzle.
it's
No,
just a wood
no.
door.
No, it's not a
grain.
puzzle. You just got to pay your taxes to get entry into the town. It's just an underground town.
You know, we came in, it was sundown.
It's not a puzzle. You're just not welcome here because of the actions you've taken in your game. This is an underground village, and they don't want you. It's not a puzzle. You don't need to solve it.
No, these kids are yelling at me, not because they stole their food. No, this is part of the dungeon.
This is part of the puzzle. I got to put this apple on this piece of wood.
I gotta hit this kid with the back of my sword. That's how I solve it.
I like how you specify the back of your sword.
The
but your-
back,
but
yeah.
your sword is double-edged.
Yeah,
so.
double. Yeah.
You're just talking about an attack. Just make an attack roll.
It's a side that doesn't see much use, so it's sharper.
That's why you got to use the back.
pommel is sharper than the tip of the blade.
Backside of the double-edged
The
sword.
backside
the
of the
backside.
double edge, yeah.
I thought for some reason you had a sharp pommel. You were just.
They're pointy pommels.
I'd like to use my pommel to hit this character in the head. Oh, okay. You trying to do non-lethal? No, my pommel's spiked.
Oh,
It's
my-
piercing damage.
My pommel is spiked and poisoned. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to us hate on dungeons while Nyx tried to express the merit behind them for however long this episode has been.
It's good. It's almost an hour.
Thank you for listening to Take the Damage podcast by Unfortunate Ones. I'm Sav.
I'm Nyx.
I'm Graythorn.
You can find links to me and various ways of contacting me if you want to play a game online. I do that professionally. Links in the description. You can find me over at startplaying.games.
Well, I mean, my links will be in the description too. Mostly just my YouTube channel.
It's okay to just say links in the description when the mic
links
turns to you.
Yeah, I don't got a lot more than that.
Yeah, links in the description.
Like, subscribe, something about a bell. And also
yeah.
become a subscriber so that we can start hosting membership exclusive stuff on YouTube. But if you want access to that, we already do host that on Patreon and our website, which will also be in the description.
Also, more subscribers. We can actually have unbroken links.
Oh yeah, and unbroken links would be pretty cool in our description so that
Yep.
you could get to our website quicker. And post show.
The end is gonna be the post show.
Fuck dungeons.
It's funny. Like 30 minutes in, I was like, "Ooh, is there not a lot of juice to squeeze on this?" Like,
I thought that too. I thought it was going to be more you talking about the merits of dungeons, and until you came out with that you also haven't played very many dungeons, and then I was like, Ruh-roh. We're in hot water. I did know I wanted to come out the gate of our
Yeah.
loot table with my idea for that 2-man puzzle. But other than that, I was like, also, like I kept wanting, in the back of my head, I kept wanting to be like, don't just talk shit. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the merits of dungeons. And then immediately I'd open my mouth, I'd get one sentence in, like it'd be like, I mean, it happened multiple times. I'm like, there's a place for dungeons. And then my next sentence, but they suck. Also, like trying to like backtrack sometimes where I was like, and you guys even helped me with this one, where I'm like, well, you know, I'm sure there's people listening that are like, you're only mentioning bad dungeons. And then you guys are like, yeah, but every module, every video, every like, I don't think I realized why I didn't like dungeons though until this conversation. That duality between it being character sheet. I knew about the character sheet thing. I knew I didn't like that about it just being roll after roll.
Yeah.
That's boring. You check out. I don't think I realized the fact that I don't like dungeons because they are directed at the players instead of characters.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized that until this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, that
And with that realization, it's solidified me not liking dungeons.
I mean, yeah. I never really thought about that because also I don't really. I don't know if my stress on like challenging your character versus your player, like how much I delineate from that. Like every challenge, everything that is a challenge to think about as in terms of decision making. Yes, there is a filter of like what would your character do, but it is still a challenge to the player. The
Absolutely.
player still makes
The problem that I see comes from it can only be like it can only be your player, your player's ability to solve this puzzle or your player's intelligence or less.
yeah.
And the reason for that is my player could be dumb, and I think it would be frustrating as a DM. And I'm not talking like babbling idiot, classic goofy barbarian dumb, but like my character is just not intelligent, and I think it would be frustrating for a DM for me to just bumble around a dungeon almost intentionally not solving it because it's like, well, yeah, my character is not magically inclined, so there's magic involved in this puzzle. My character wouldn't even think that there's magic in the
Yeah.
puzzle, and if he knew that there was magic in the puzzle, he would think that that's beyond his ability to address. So I'm going to play into that, and I think that'd be frustrating as fuck for a DM.
Yeah.
So instead, what I have to do is leave my character behind and play as my player. I agree that everything that is a challenge for your character, unless you're using dice, is also a challenge for your player, no matter what level of intelligence or charisma or anything that you're doing. And it is common to lend more intelligence or more charisma to your character when you're role-playing through a situation. Absolutely. But it still plays off of your character, and your character, you still have like things like personality traits in mind with your character where it's like, I'm trying to solve this, but I need to do so in a way where my character is trying to get through this conversation, trying to say the right things, but remains shy because my character is shy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like there's still character involvement in the challenge to the player, whereas like there's a lot of room for it just going completely above the character and just the player when it comes to dungeons and puzzle solving, physical puzzle solving.
I think to a degree I agree with you, but also like the aspects of like even the role playing challenges, which is there's usually a time limit and it's usually off the cuff speeches or it's usually off the cuff
100%.
conversations. Where like somebody like I've had times where like, oh, this character says something to your character. How do you respond? What do you say to whatever? And I'm like, I'm sitting there thinking like, I really don't know. Like I don't know what this one as a person. I don't necessarily know what's the best
Sure.
response in that scenario. And then two, it's trying to filter it through my character.
Mm-hmm.
Where like all of a sudden when you put a time limit on that, it's like, hey man, you gotta like we gotta keep the ball
I mean,
the ball rolling.
usually you don't necessarily put a time limit on the
I've
character.
had it where like there's been pressure to to respond quicker.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
But
I agree with you.
and it's just like, well, if I was really playing as the character, I would have all the time in the world because time wouldn't necessarily exist in that moment because the character is responding.
Yeah.
And if there is a delay because I'm trying to filter my thoughts through a character and how the character would respond.
I know I personally have lent that where it's like, hold on, I'm trying to think of how my character would respond.
Yeah.
I immediately when someone says that, I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You're trying not to respond as yourself. You're trying to respond as your character. You're trying to think of how the character responds. Sure, I'll give you a moment.
Yeah. Of course, there's been plenty of times where there is more room given.
Yeah. Well, and then also like you're playing a character with fucking 25 intelligence, and that's just not you as a player.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm trying to
Or
think of
even
how my
25 charisma if you're not
yeah,
charismatic.
and it's like I'm trying to think of how my character would respond, and it's like I'm not sure what to say in the moment, but I feel like my character would. Okay, but then we'll leave it up to a roll.
Yeah.
It's still interacting with your character.
Yeah, and I think in a similar vein, in my mind, it translates similarly to like your character is running into an interactive or an intelligence-based puzzle
Sure.
where you can't solve it as a player. You don't know how you don't know how to respond in a charismatic situation.
Yeah.
So you let your character roll for it. One, you don't know how to solve through your own personal intelligence because in the one situation lacking the charisma or the
Sure.
history with that conversation. The other, not understanding how the puzzle is working because, whatever the reason, so letting your character do it. Granted, in situations like you've talked about, if your character doesn't have those skills, it becomes much harder and much more stressed to be able to try to
Well,
solve
also, it just makes it almost not a party game. You step into a dungeon. Usually it's like intelligence and dexterity are the two primary roles that you're going to find in a dungeon. So, like, this just isn't for your barbarian. It's no longer a group game. It's no longer a party solve. Your barbarian is just here while I've built this thing for your monk and your wizard.
Wouldn't that be true for like heavy charismatic role playing parts?
Not necessarily.
Because
And I'll tell you why not necessarily, because I was thinking about that before I said it, is you got your barbarian there and he's trying to get information and it's like a charismatic thing. And it's like, okay, but also, yeah, like my character probably wouldn't even try and talk to this situation. He's just going to lift up his great axe and put it on his shoulder and glare at this peasant. And it's like, okay, well, now this character, this strength-based character is using their character to figure out a role-playing moment.
Yeah, in a way to solve it.
You can't stare at a puzzle.
Have you tried?
I just think like, yeah, absolutely. And absolutely that can happen in role-play situations. The fucking person that you're trying to get information out of might not be intimidated by the barbarian, in which case, yes, in this moment, the barbarian is just kind of there and they're just kind of useless. But they still, like, that's a moment, whereas like a dungeon is usually a session long. You're talking about an entire session where your barbarian isn't important. Also, another big difference is your barbarian put himself into this role-playing moment. It's okay that they fail. Your barbarian didn't put themselves into an intelligence and dex-based dungeon. You put them there. It's a little bit different. Unless your argument is that you didn't force them to come here, in which case it means avoiding dungeons is a reasonable response.
Yeah, if that player doesn't want to be a part of dungeons, then yes, they wouldn't partake in the dungeon if it's not a forced dungeon.
Yeah, but if it's a forced dungeon, now you've put them there, and they're there against their will for an entire session where they don't matter.
You know what I thought of as you were talking about that? What about, because I was like, oh, have you tried in terms of whatever, intimidating a puzzle? What if it was a sentient dungeon?
Mm-hmm.
The dungeon had sentience.
Yeah.
And what if your barbarian intimidated a wall puzzle to be like, I don't know how to solve this. If I don't know how to solve it, I'm going to start chopping into this wall.
So that would actually be
and
my
then the
solution.
dungeon would be like, no, okay.
That
Like,
would
you roll high
actually
enough.
be my solution. Would be,
Well, that was a Baldur's Gate thing.
What was that?
There's a door in Baldur's Gate 3 where you could threaten to set it on fire and it'll open.
Really?
Yeah.
So
That's cool.
even beyond setting it on fire, look at your barbarian's character sheet and the discrepancy between their ability to roll and other players' characters' ability to roll. And based off of that, just make the dungeon destructible. Now there should be
Yes.
some level of consequence to it being destructible.
Just bad company your way.
Just make it possible to bad company your
Yeah.
way through the dungeon, and then your barbarian's not useless. Now, there could be consequences
For
to that,
approaching it that way,
or
yes.
there could be consequences to that happening, like in occasions, there should be calls as to when it would be appropriate for that to happen. But now your barbarian is walking through this situation, and he gets to a door, and he goes, this one looks like it needs to be solved with intelligence. Wizard? And he's looking around for things that are destructible. He gets to another door, and maybe that room only can. And again, we're back to a party game. This is the wizard's time to shine. And then you get to another door, and once again, because you've already established this, your barbarian's like, what could I break? It's like, yeah, that door looks indestructible. But also, the frame of the door is holding up these pillars and whatnot, and those look pretty breakable. And so now your barbarian gets to solve a problem with the way
Sure.
that your barbarian
Sure.
thinks.
Yeah, I think that's all stuff to consider as a DM, where you're like
Yeah.
trying to consider
you can
different
have-
aspects of having your players interact.
So talking about the dexterity thing, okay, this isn't an intelligence puzzle. Every little square that is on the ground in front of you is clearly a trap. We've established this. To get through this, you need to be able to pass through this situation and pull the lever, which you hope disables the trap. The wizard's not doing that. Now, the monk might be able to do that. The fighter might be able to do that. Or a mage with Pass Without a Trace might be able to do that just by not triggering the things. I think Pass Without a Trace makes you
I don't think it makes you lighter. It-
not
it-
lighter. Okay, I know there's something where you can like traverse through planes and you're like technically here,
Oh, that's
but, or sorry, you're here, but you're like technically not. Anyways, my point is
the
that
ethereal one. The
there's
ethereal one.
ways to solve this that isn't intelligence and isn't breaking things that you know are appropriate for your group. Now, you could just risk the dexterity checks, and if you pass, great, and if you fail, damage. And maybe as the monk or the fighter, that's the way you want to play it. And so you're just like, yeah, fuck it. And you just run and you hit all of the things, but you try and dodge out of the way, and you get to the end, you were successful, and you pull the thing. Cool. That's how your dexterity character solved it. But it was never going to be intelligence, and it was never going to be strength in this room. So, like, you're kind of designing the rooms around the different aspects of your characters. But even doing that, I think that would be fun, genuinely fun, not going to check out, because you need to think about the appropriate way to solve each room in this puzzle. And you need to do it as a group. Otherwise, you're just going to be constantly taking damage. I think that one dungeon would be a good time. I think that is the only way, that sounds really harsh, but to make a dungeon fully a good time and rely on your characters. Don't
for the way that you like to
the way
play.
I'm talking about. Yeah. Within the parameters of what I'm talking about. Don't think that would be fun twice. I think the second time you go into a dungeon and you realize that it's playing off of your party and whatnot, you're going to check out again.
Oh, even in my opinion,
Oh,
where-
each room is designed to be solved by a party member or two.
Don't get me wrong. I think even as somebody who is genuinely, I am a fan of both building and exploring dungeons. I like the idea of exploring dungeons, and I've seen it done, and I've seen it done well. Like
We shouldn't have ended the podcast, by the way. This
Yeah, we
is just
shouldn't
all dungeon talk still.
Very on topic.
Yeah. Super on topic post show. Fuck. What was I gonna say?
Sorry.
More on
Um,
topic than an actual show.
I know, right? Fuck. I don't remember. I was saying something.
Diabetes.
It's gone now. But Still, I'd love to do a sentient dungeon. That would be cool.
I think that's a very
that's what I was gonna say.
interesting way to write a dungeon, and if you're going to put people in dungeons, at the very least, they should be interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna say is even as somebody who's a fan of them, I think they're far and few between. I think if you're gonna do dungeons and you're gonna have it in a campaign, you shouldn't have a lot. It shouldn't be back to back. It should be, if you're gonna do it, maybe a couple of times here and there in like a full campaign.
Yeah.
Or even in like if you have a small campaign, if it's like a 6 or 8 sessioner, maybe one of those is a dungeon.
Yeah.
One or two of them, and it's like you don't go back to it.
Yeah. Oh, but that's like Wilderdam. There's one dungeon.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable enough because again, like you said, to build all that stuff in a way that
It's
seems
continuously
approachable.
engaging.
Yeah. Like, unless your players love it. Unless your players really like dungeons, everyone's like, I'm fucking dungeon fiending.
But again, that kind of goes back to style. Like,
yeah. Your style is DM, style of the players. What they
Yeah.
wanna play with. If you were to post up like on startplaying.games, fucking hey, dungeons only.
dungeons all day, dungeons only.
Do you not like dragons as part of Dungeons and Dragons? You only like dungeons? Well, I got the dungeons for you.
Just thinking of a villain arc of just my dislike for dungeons. If I were to take that into villainy, post dungeon only campaigns on startplaying.games and just making them exclusively roles and just making other people fall out of love.
You know a funny thing I just thought of right now? We could have that demarcation in the podcast, the show. It says this is the end of the show, this is the post show. And then we just keep all this into the main show. Cause it's so fucking dungeon focused. It's like, a new post show.
It's pretty dungeon focused.
That's fine.
I'll let you figure that out. Here's what I'll do. I'll let you figure that out
No.
in editing. Oh fuck, I think I'm editing that one.
We're both currently
One of us,
editing.
yeah, whoever finishes
Whoever's
first.
finishing first is gonna handle this
Okay.
one.
Whoever finishes first can handle it. And I will emphasize that by saying, thank you for listening to Take the Damage podcast. I'm Sav.
I'm Graythorn.
You can
Links in
find
the
my
description.
links in the description. You can find our various links in the description.
That's it. We're done with that part.
Yeah, exactly. Find our various links in the description. Like, subscribe,
If you want our whole
spells.
spiel literally 20 minutes ago. It's there.
If you stuck around in the main show and realized there's still 20 minutes on the timer,
Or if
it's not there,
we decided that we're just not doing that as part of the
then
post
this
show,
is the middle of the post show, and we're still going to post
Yeah,
show.
this is part of the post show.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah.